GreenCape is a non-profit organization that drives the widespread adoption of economically viable green economy solutions from South Africa. They are working on a multi-stakeholder project with the financial support of the Green Climate Fund, implemented and managed by UNIDO. Focused on pipeline development to deploy clean energy technology solutions in Municipal Wastewater Treatment Works of South Africa, providing readiness activities for the Green Climate Fund. Ultimately, this project aims to support the utilization of climate finance in the Municipal Wastewater Treatment Works space, where energy-efficient and renewable energy applications can assist. This Future Cities Africa episode is with Jane Reddick, Program Manager for Water and Agriculture at GreenCape. We explore technologies identified as viable options for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects at wastewater treatment works. Jane, welcome. What are the most energy-intensive processes at a municipal wastewater treatment works?
So wastewater treatment works, they differ in terms of the technologies used, but in general, there are various processes that are in place. Firstly, typically there's the primary treatment, and during primary treatment, that's mostly for where the incoming wastewater remove many of the solids or degrit or have sedimentation to remove some of the sludge. And this particular part of the wastewater treatment works isn't a big energy user. From the primary treatment, it moves to the secondary treatment, and this is where the bulk of the energy is used in secondary treatment. So secondary treatment is essentially where the wastewater is treated to remove the organic matter. So it's biologically treated, typically in the presence of oxygen, to remove the organic matter. And in this process, there is aeration, and aeration is the big energy user in wastewater treatment works. So typically, that would be anything between 13 and 80% of the total energy that's used in a wastewater treatment works. And then from secondary treatment, the wastewater is then sent to tertiary treatment, typically, where it's removed any further contaminants that have not been removed in the secondary treatment. There's also sterilization or disinfection that happens at this point to make sure that the bacteria is removed from the water and can be released into the environment if that's where the wastewater is released. And then again, the tertiary treatment isn't a big user of energy. It's the secondary processing where the bulk of the energy is used, but then also throughout the process there is pumping and there's motors, and pumps and motors are another big user of energy in wastewater treatment works, typically using about 4 to 31% of energy. And then lastly, the other big user is throughout the process, sludge is removed, solids. The sludge needs to be treated, it needs to be dewatered and stabilized, and this process requires energy. Sludge, it needs to be managed and transported from the wastewater treatment works. So dewatering is really important to reduce costs, etc. And this requires energy. And typically, sludge treatment can be anything between 5 to 35% of energy use in a wastewater treatment. So those are the big energy users. But of course, there are plenty of other energy users, but those are the main ones.
What are the most promising and proven technologies currently available to improve energy efficiency at municipal wastewater treatment works, and how do these technologies work?
Any wastewater treatment works that's considering looking at energy efficiency interventions, I think before one even explores what those are, the first step is to undertake an audit. This is the absolute critical first step. You can start with a preliminary energy audit, level 1 energy audit, basic audit. In this process, you'd collect metering data, analyze energy usage patterns, you'd identify areas where there's high demand, and during this process, you'd use utility bills, meter readings, etc. So this is a really important first step because it'll identify how much energy is being used at the wastewater treatment works, and usually what the wastewater treatment works, they would identify what their specific power consumption is, SPC, and they can benchmark this against international best practice or just national best practice to see how are they doing in comparison to best practice. place. So this is a critical first step. And then during this audit process, a number of interventions will be identified for energy efficiency. And in terms of energy efficiency, there are many opportunities that are actually relatively easy and simple to implement: process changes, process optimization. So in a wastewater treatment works, there's often a number of opportunities just for very simple interventions that don't require much capital cost. And many of these are simply optimizing the processes. In terms of the aeration process, which I mentioned is the biggest user in an energy in wastewater treatment works, there are a number of fairly simple interventions that can be implemented. For example, you can adjust the aeration rates based on the actual real-time oxygen demand, so you're not supplying more oxygen than is needed. Install variable frequency or speed drives in the blowers that actually supply the air, so that making sure that matching the airflow with the actual demand. And then you could replace the diffusers with fine bubble diffusers or other energy efficient aeration technologies that will improve the oxygen transfer and reduce the energy requirements. And I mentioned that pumps and motors are a major user of energy at wastewater treatment works. Again, they're relatively simple interventions that can be implemented. For example, installing variable speed drives on motors, whether these motors are for pumps, centrifuges, or mechanical mixers, that allow to match the flow rates with the actual process demand. Also, there's an opportunity to replace inefficient motors with pumps, with energy efficient ones, or just regular maintenance even of the piping system, improve system efficiencies, or just ensuring efficient flow distribution and minimizing pressure drops, etc. These can all help save energy. And there are some really good resources for technical staff at wastewater treatment works that can help them identify how they can reduce their consumption for pumps and motors, and indeed all aspects of wastewater treatment works. I also mentioned that sludge management is a big user of energy at wastewater treatment works. And here again, there are a number of different interventions that can be implemented. For example, making sure there are gravity thickeners in place that increase the solids content, so that can help with dewatering as an energy efficiency means of dewatering. Also optimizing the sludge, the dosage and the selection of the conditioning agents that are added to the sludge to dewater it. That can enhance the dewatering, therefore less energy is required. But also practitioners could explore energy efficiency dewatering technologies like belt or screw presses and centrifuges. So there are various opportunities around sludge management. But the key is to dewater the sludge as cost effectively or as energy efficiently as possible.
Can you explain how renewable energy technologies like solar panels, wind turbines, or biogas systems can be integrated in municipal wastewater treatment works? What are the key considerations for successful implementation?
So there are a number of renewable energy interventions that can be implemented at wastewater treatment works. For example, solar PV. And so solar PV can be implemented. It can be either grid tied, so that's where there's no battery storage, and this system is suitable where you're not looking to provide a protection from load shedding. So because the system will only provide power while the sun is shining, essentially, and any excess energy is just sent back to the grid. But if you are looking for more extended power from solar PV and looking for protection from load shedding, then you need to include battery storage. Typically, this would be a lithium-ion battery. It does increase the cost of the system, but it does mean that means that this excess solar power that's generated during the day can then be stored and used when the sun is not shining. And then if there's any excess power, that can also be sent back to the grid. And solar PV systems at wastewater treatment works can actually be, there's a number of configurations in which they can take place. For example, they can be ground mounted, where they're literally installed on the ground. Wastewater treatment works often have a lot of space. And then they could also be rooftop mounted on any of the buildings at the site. And also they could be floating systems if there are any bodies of water in, for example, settling tanks at the wastewater treatment works. They could also be installed there. So there are a number of different options for solar PV at wastewater treatment works. Another opportunity is around biogas for combined heat and power, CHP, combined heat and power. So in some of the wastewater treatment works in South Africa, I think there are about 50 of them, the wastewater treatment works use anaerobic digestion. And anaerobic digestion is essentially a biological process where the organic matter is broken down in an oxygen-free environment. And during this process, biogas is produced. It's mainly methane, but also it also contains other gases, like carbon dioxide, nitrogen, ammonia. And this biogas actually has energy value. Typically, the 50 wastewater treatment works in South Africa that use anaerobic digestion, it's typically used actually just to stabilize the sludge, reduce pathogens, and then reduce the volumes of the sludge that are produced, which makes it more cost effective to handle because there's less sludge. The sludge needs to be managed and taken off site. That's typically why anaerobic digestion is used, but the biogas is generally, it's either flared or just released into the atmosphere. Of course, that contributes to greenhouse gases, and that's a missed opportunity for using that energy. So there is an opportunity for that biogas to actually have a combined heat and power system fitted to it. And this system could then convert the biogas into electricity and energy that can be used in the plant. And of course, there's a number of benefits for this because, having the combined anaerobic digestion and the combined heat and power, having that together has benefits for municipalities because you're reducing the costs incurred of disposing of large volumes of sludge because you're reducing those volumes. You're also addressing load shedding because you're generating additional electricity that can then be used on site. It's reducing the hazards posed by the sludge because the sludges are, by treating it anaerobically, you're reducing the pathogens, stabilizing it, and making it much more safe for disposal. And then, of course, you're reducing your greenhouse gas emissions if you're not flaring that biogas and you're actually using that on site. But biogas, combined heat and power, is most suited. The best business case for that is if in plants where they have already an existing anaerobic digester, then you can just simply add the combined heat and power system. Also, if any municipality that's wanting to consider using that technology, they should do pre-feasibility or feasibility studies to determine if it's actually feasible to implement such a system at the plant. And then in general, combined heat and power is not really, or with anaerobic digestion, is not really suited to the smaller plants. So typically you're looking at plants with bigger plants, larger than 15 million liters per day capacity would be where it becomes more financially feasible. But there are also other technologies that can be renewable energy technologies that can be used. For example, mini hydro or micro hydro, essentially small-scale hydroelectric renewable energy interventions, and this is not being widely adopted in South Africa at all. It's quite new in terms of wastewater treatment works. It's quite new. I'm not aware of any wastewater treatment works in South Africa that use this technology yet, but it's certainly an opportunity. It's very context specific. There needs to be sufficient number, like a height difference. You need sufficient and stable flows of water flowing through the wastewater treatment works. You need a sufficient head or height difference in order to capture that energy. And so it would very much depend on the site. And you'd need to do a feasibility study to see if that was suitable. Also, wind power is another option, although again, this would only really be suited to wastewater treatment works that are located somewhere where there's sufficient space to have a wind power systems, and this is typically, it requires, it needs to be in an area, obviously, where there's a good wind resource, but then also you need to do multi-year wind studies to validate the product before it's implemented. So this is not being widely used to provide renewable energy to wastewater treatment works, but it is an option. There are also other opportunities that can also be considered, like thermal hydrolysis. And as I mentioned, energy storage can be used for solar PV, but it can also be used for any of the other opportunities.
What is the business case for municipalities implementing renewable energy and energy efficiency at municipal wastewater treatment works? And what interventions should municipalities prioritize?
So I think the key priority for any wastewater treatment works that's looking to implement energy efficiency or renewable energy interventions is to focus first on the energy efficiency. These are typically quite low cost, even no cost interventions. That's where the real sort of starting point should be. Some of these interventions can save up to from anything between 10 to 70% of the energy for what's being used in that particular process. And paybacks can be less than a year, or even up to or under 3 years, and in some cases longer than that. But focusing on the sort of energy efficiency interventions, definitely a first step. It will also important, if you're going to consider renewable energy, that the demand is reduced, because then the capital cost and the sizing of the renewable energy is much smaller. In terms of solar PV, the payback period is typically around 4 to 8 years for a solar PV installation. If you're going to add storage, that increases to anything between 6 to 12 years, typically. Internal rate of return, anything between 12 to 25%. And just to give an indication of the capital costs of solar PV projects is anything between 10,000 and 14,000 Rand per kilowatt hour. In terms of combined heat and power with anaerobic digestion, it's much more cost effective if there's already an anaerobic digester in place. If that's the case, then only the capital cost of the combined heat and power needs to be incurred. And typically that capital cost is around 20 to 45 million Rand per megawatt. And payback periods are anything between 5 to 15 years, with internal rate of return anything between 18 to 30%. But if wastewater treatment works doesn't have an anaerobic digester in place, and they wanted to then have to install an anaerobic digester and the combined heat and power, then the capital costs increase to around 40 million Rand per megawatt, and paybacks of around 15 years. So generally, it's recommended the business case if there's already an existing or a planned anaerobic digester at the site. In terms of why municipalities should consider energy efficiency and renewable energy at wastewater treatment works, as I mentioned, there's a strong business case for many of the energy efficiency interventions, and these will reduce costs. With rising electricity costs, this is a significant opportunity for wastewater treatment works to reduce its costs, but also, of course, reduce its carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. So there are many benefits for a municipality to implement this. And of course, if they're going to implement renewable energy, that can also help mitigate the impacts of load shedding. So there are a number of important reasons for municipalities to consider energy efficiency and renewable energy.
Jane, in closing, where can municipalities and other interested parties get more information on renewable energy and energy efficiency opportunities?
So there are a number of really, really helpful resources available to wastewater treatment works or to municipalities that are looking to implement energy efficiency and renewable energy at wastewater treatment works. For example, SALGA, in partnership with the GIZ, produced a report that was authored by the Water Group that is a practical guideline for energy efficiency audits at wastewater treatment works. Essentially, this provides, as the name suggests, very practical information on how wastewater treatment works can undertake energy audits. And as I mentioned, that's the first step towards an energy efficiency journey. So highly recommend that report. But there are other really great resources. For example, the Water Research Commission published a report that was authored by the Water Group. And this is an assessment framework for the feasibility of energy efficiency and renewable energy at municipal wastewater treatment works. And again, this very, very useful resources for any wastewater treatment works that's interested in finding out more about what they can do to reduce their energy consumption. And there are a few other reports that are useful, just to name one or two. For example, the anaerobic digestion, a practical guideline prepared by the Water Group. It's SAGEN is a really great resource. It's a partnership with the German government, GIZ, and on there are a number of resources that can provide useful information. Similarly, there is a study, Biogas Potential, a survey of South African wastewater treatment works. This was done by Sabia, if I'm not mistaken, and also in partnership with the German government. And here again, for each wastewater treatment works, well, not for each wastewater treatment works in South Africa, but for most of the wastewater treatment works in South Africa, there is an assessment of biogas and CHP potential. So really useful resource for any wastewater treatment works there. And then, of course, as part of the project that we're undertaking, the project that's funded by the Green Climate Fund, it's implemented by UNIDO, and we are the delivery partner that's looking to increase the deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency interventions in wastewater treatment works. As part of this project, we're undertaking a number of activities. One of them is to produce fact sheets on energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. So there are 10 fact sheets. We're in the final stages of design for these fact sheets, and they'll be shortly published or disseminated, and they'll be available on our website, www.greencape.co.za. So there you can find the fact sheets for all of the different technologies and more that I've spoken about today, and various other resources are available there too.
Thank you for this insightful conversation, Jane. This episode is part of a 3-episode series. Make sure to check out the rest of the series on Future Cities Africa.